There's a documentary out now on Pete Rose. It's a 4-part series. I've watched the first 2. People are curious, or at least some friends are, what I think of this. I am from the Cincinnati area. Spent a lot of time on the Pete Rose story when I first got to ESPN. I was co-anchoring with Bob Lee on SportsCenter, and we did, I think, some work that rivaled anybody else who was covering the Pete Rose story. But I had sources. Nobody else who was covering this story had actually placed a bet with Pete's bookie, but I did. And also, a lot of times bookies, if they get a lot of action on something, they'll offload that, with another bookie. And that other bookie was who I placed all my bets with. So I was aware of Pete betting on sports. I was never told that he bet on baseball as a player, but I knew that he was betting on all kinds of sports and not doing well betting on all kinds of sports. So I've watched it, and there's nothing new in there. It's sad. It really is. Because Pete, what made him great is what has kept him out of the Hall of Fame. There's no contrition. He talks about, hey, after all this time, haven't I paid my punishment? Yes, we know this. We've talked about this. The career, he's a Hall of Famer. But you signed something. And, now you want to put him in the Hall of Fame, put him in the Hall of Fame. As I've said before, you want to put Bonds or Clemens, and you want to put an asterisk by this. You want to tell the story of baseball. Tell the story of baseball in a museum. I'm okay with that. Pete has gained more attention, made more money by not being in the Hall of Fame. If Pete went into the Hall of Fame 20 years ago, no one would clamor for his autograph the way they do now. Because Pete will sign something, and he'll put whatever you want him on, on a baseball. But he has benefited by not being in the Hall of Fame. Now, he does want it both ways, that he'll go up Cooperstown. Others are going into the Hall of Fame. He'll set up an autograph show. But he wants his kids, grandkids to be able to go to the Hall of Fame, when he's gone, and go in there and say, oh, there's my grandfather. He's a Hall of Famer. And Pete is, but, I'm watching the documentary. It's just, that's who Pete is. He kind of stuck in the early 70s, like his personality, late 60s, early 70s. That's just who he is. And, he's approaching an age where you're not going to be around that much longer. But the documentary, so far, the first 2 episodes, didn't tell me much. And keep in mind, I did a couple of interviews with Pete for SportsCenter. I also had Pete on my radio show when, for the first time, he admitted that he bet every single time for the Reds to win. He had never said that. But he lied for so many years. Hey, I never bet. And then what did he do? He wrote a book. He made money because then he admitted that he bet on baseball. But, we watch athletes sometimes, and we love how they play. And then being in this business, then you find out the person behind the athlete when they're off the field. And it's like Lawrence Taylor. Unbelievable. Do I want to hang around with him? No. But on the field, and that's why you can get too close. Pete Rose was unbelievable. Everybody wanted to wear number 14, have their hair cut like Pete's, slide head first. But then you meet the person, and then all of a sudden you realize, I'm going to stay as far away as I can from the person, but the player, he was unbelievable. So just watching the documentary, and you can't argue with his impact on the game. He was unique. I don't know if we've ever had an MVP, and maybe, one of you guys can look at this. He won the MVP one year, and he hit 5 home runs. I don't know if we've ever had an MVP, an everyday player, hit less than 5 home runs. Maybe we have, but that's pretty amazing, that the impact that he had on a game. And he was a singles hitter. I think Johnny Bench may have hit 40 home runs that year, his teammate, but Pete hit 5 and was the MVP. That might have been 1972 or 3 where he's the MVP. But he was a big deal, still in the news with the documentary. But look, he'll go to his grave being Pete Rose. That's what made him great. But he could never say, I'm sorry. How do I give back to baseball? And he could be in the Hall of Fame. I truly believe that. And I've had private conversations with former Commissioner Bud Selig. And, I mean, they'll stay private. But, you know, I found out a lot more about Pete Rose. And I think when Pete dies, there will be more information that comes out about Pete Rose. But, you know, you see him and he blames everybody but himself. I mean, he's the reason. And, yes, now it sounds hypocritical, baseball in bed with gambling. And I understand that. But Pete was in a position to manipulate a game. Hey, I'm betting on my team to win. Well, you might be putting somebody out there who shouldn't be out there for the third consecutive time. Or there were certain pitchers that I was told that he didn't bet on the Reds to win. But, you know, it's complicated and it's sad. But I have watched the first couple of episodes. So watching baseball, listening to baseball on the radio, and then kind of juxtapose that with, oh, that's right, I grew up listening to the Reds with Pete Rose playing and having that unfold yesterday, and then watching the second part of the documentary a little bit later on yesterday. Yes, Marvin?
I see besides Pete Rose, Maury Wills of the Dodgers in 1962 hit 6 home runs.
So Maury hit 6, Pete hit 5.
Yeah.
Okay. And Maury Wills was a shortstop, and then he set the single-season record, I think, for stolen bases for the Dodgers that year. But, yeah, Pete with 5. But Pete was a force. He was. The fight with Bud Harrelson and the Mets when he slid into second base. And, look, Pete was at fault with that. You know, he came in hard, you know, to knock Bud Harrelson down, and Buddy was not a big guy. Buddy called him something, and then Pete made it seem like, oh, well, he started it because he called me something. No, Pete started it because it was a over-the-top hard slide there to take him out. And this was, you know, in the postseason that they were playing. But, you know, look, whatever your opinion is with Pete, good. I don't want the show to be dominated with that because it has been before. It's just I've seen the 2 episodes. I wasn't involved in the documentary, although I don't think there's any other journalist out there who had more interaction with Pete with his bookie, and when Pete came on the radio show at ESPN and said that he bet every single time for the Reds to win. Let's see. Poll question today. What are we going to go with, Seton O'Connor?
It's kind of crazy how many lives that story has.
With Pete?
With Pete.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same story, but it's carried on for decades. And every 10 years or so, something new will happen with it. I mean, this time it's a documentary, but all of a sudden, years later, it's, well, he bet every single game, or he bet every game to win, or he bet whatever. There's always a new thing. Why do you think that this Pete Rose story still is so intriguing, or has the legs it has?
I think he's a sympathetic figure to people because he was so great. How's he not in the Hall of Fame? And, oh, you know, he bet on baseball. Well, when he was a manager. That's true. Now, do I believe he bet on baseball as a player? I do. I do. I can take you back 1986 playoffs. It was at Mets, Astros, and I was there at Shea Stadium, and Pete was working. I remember him coming to me. I was with Bob Costas, and we were on the dugout steps, and he said, "Who do you fellas like today?" Well, that's what you get. That's gambling terminology. Friends will say that to me like, "Hey, who do you like?" And I'll go, "No, I'm not. We're not betting on." Well, Pete was saying that to Bob and myself at Shea Stadium, and might have been Mike Scott pitching, so we said, obviously, the Astros with Mike Scott on the mound. But do I think he was betting as a baseball player? I do. I do. Because you're not good at he wasn't good gambling. Then you want to do what you're really good at or you have information on, and that is baseball. He was there. He could control lineup. Or if he's playing in a game, there's a lot of different tentacles with this. But I do think it's sad because whenever it used to be, people would say, "Oh, you're from Cincinnati. Should Pete Rose be in the Hall of Fame?" That always came up. That'd be like the first thing. It had to do with Pete Rose. And it felt like more people on the outside were interested in how Cincinnati, looks at Pete Rose. I told Pete to his face that he embarrassed the city of Cincinnati. I did a Sunday conversation with him, and I said, you embarrassed Cincinnati. And he just, he never wrapped his arms around it. He was a force, man. What made him great? It's just like Bonds, what made him great. Clemens, what makes them great. Lance Armstrong, what makes them great. They can never say, I'm sorry. And that usually prevents them from being able to move on or, for people to be able to celebrate them. We should celebrate Lance Armstrong for staying alive. Testicular cancer, just to get on the bike and be in the Tour de France. And then he became Lance. He's going to take out everybody in his way. Never apologize. Clemens, Bonds, never apologize. Keep moving forward. That's Pete. Yeah, Marv.
Does this story have legs if he makes the Hall of Fame before he gets caught gambling?
Yeah, there'd be the big argument of, can you take him out? There's a lot of people who've spent a lot of time on Pete Rose, just letting you know behind the scenes. And look, I've tried to crack the code, but then I got to the point where I go, I don't care anymore. I loved watching him play. I was so fortunate to watch Pete play, the big red machine. And then I just got to the point that why was I caring? And it didn't feel like he was caring to solve. If he says to Bart Giamatti, the commissioner, how do I give back to the game? And I remember saying this to Bud Selig. If Pete said to you, let me go and spend an entire year in the minor leagues talking to players about gambling. And he'd say, well, that would have helped. I think baseball wanted to forgive him. Pete never, ever showed any contrition where they would have. And maybe there's something that comes out in the other two episodes with Pete. But, yeah, just watching him, he was talking to Marty Brennaman, and it's sad. Really is. Because sometimes the reality hits you. We live in a fantasy world. That, hey, I'm watching baseball, and this is awesome, and, these great teams. And then all of a sudden the reality hits you of, he was gambling on baseball. Oh, he did steroids. Oh, he was, that's the reality sometimes. That's the cold, bucket of water that we get. And Pete, look, he brings out a lot of emotions with me because I was there, listening on the radio, going to games. First autograph I ever got, Pete Rose. First game I went to, saw Pete Rose. And then I see him now, trouble walking, still signing autographs. Yeah, Mark.
For you personally, would he have been on the level of a Jerry West or Johnny Bench had all this gambling stuff had not come out?
No, it was different. He played in a way that, like Jerry played with elegance, grace. He was a different style. Pete was like, I'm coming through the front door. Now, I love that, but I was more of a Johnny Bench, Tony Perez fan. I for some reason, Pete was great, but I like those two more. Sort of their style, their grace, how they played.